Welcome to Textile Update, the podcast where we can share our passion for textiles, fibers, and yarns. This is Gwendolyn Hustvedt. And now, in the fourth and final podcast on protein fibers, we turn our attention to silk, a completely different protein fiber that opened the door to our understanding of how to manufacture fibers. The final topic for protein fibers is silk. Now, I am not going to have a separate podcast on spider silk. We're focusing on silk from silkworms here. So I'll give you a brief explanation of why we could actually even talk about spider silk, but I hate spiders. So the protein that we make silk, that silk fibers are made from, nature. Silk fibers are made from a protein called fibroin. Such a 20th century word. Fibroin, it rhymes with groin. Fib is like a lie. I don't know. It's a tough word. We don't see it on the back of shampoo bottles, right? We'll see keratin on the back of shampoo bottles, but we'll see silk protein on the back of shampoo bottles if they're using fibroin or ground up silk fibers, which would have nothing to do with your hair. But fibroin is the name of the protein, the polymer that makes up the silk fiber. But of course, it was a huge victory for us to understand that the polymer that makes up the silk fiber is very different in its nature than keratin, the polymer that makes up other protein fibers from animal sources. In particular, fibroin includes amino acids that do not have sulfur. So there's no sulfur, there's no disulfide bonding, which means that that's one of the many reasons why there isn't any crimp. And let's be honest, a big reason why there isn't any crimp is that there's no purpose in having crimp. We could see the purpose of the animal fibers for the animals, right? It provides an insulative layer on their surface, a protective layer. So having it be really bouncy and bulky and containing lots of insulative air, right? That makes sense for an animal that's producing this layer of hair. But the silk fibers for the silkworm are to make a very sturdy cocoon. And so the fibers don't need cohesiveness. They're held together by a compound that's excreted as the silk fiber is being extruded from the orifices of the silkworm. I want you to think kind of nostrils here, right? They're triangular shaped. There's two of them next to each other. Obviously not nostrils in the sense that the silkworm isn't, which is silk larva, isn't breathing out of these orifices, but just in terms of their configuration, right? So two triangular orifices. And, nostrils exude a kind of mucus, right? They secrete a mucus, and in the same way, these orifices secrete a kind of mucus-like liquid that is called sericin. And kind of like mucus, it hardens into sort of a crusty coating. It's kind of sticky, and so the silk fibers are held together with that. So yes, in fact, silk cocoons are kind of coated in silk sort of mucus, right? So the process of cultivating silk, of taking silk from something that was found occasionally hanging in cocoons from trees to something that could be produced en masse, this was something that was done in China in, 3,000 years ago. We see evidence of silk over a long period of time. I'm not going to get too much into it. I've got a lot of science here to do, but I could do a whole series just about the history of fibers. That really sounds fun. But there's a myth, right, that the empress elevated to the status of goddess when she figured out how to do the silk. The story goes that she was in her moonlit garden one evening, right? So you can picture her under a beautiful tree, right? In a beautiful, obviously any kind of structure you imagine is the wrong era, but picture a beautiful outdoor garden structure. And she's, let's say you want to picture a really pampered empress, right, who does no work for herself. And so when she's sitting there holding her cup of tea, right, in her outstretched hand, sort of distractedly gazing at the moon, thinking about how shiny and mysterious the moon was, and she hears a plop, and there in her cup of tea is a silkworm cocoon. Her first thought is to call for her maid, but of course her maid doesn't come, right? So she uses perhaps one of her extraordinarily long fingernails, designed to indicate she does no work, to fish the cocoon out of her hot tea. But the heat from the tea has melted the saracen, and as she pulls the cocoon from it, it unreels, right? It starts to unroll, and she catches one of the fibers with her extraordinarily long fingernail, pulls it up. It passes between her and the light of the moon, and she sees this radiant reflection from this very lustrous fiber. And by the time her maid arrives to find out what is going on, the empress has already discovered that the silkworm cocoon can be unrolled after being dunked in a hot liquid that melts the saracen, and that the fiber from this cocoon is very long, very strong, and in fact long enough and strong enough that it's worth human beings going to the trouble to unreeling insect cocoons. So that's a mythology, but the reality is that the moths that are the end stage of the life stages of the silk moth lay their eggs. The eggs hatch, right, and then in the larval phase in cultivation in the farms, they're fed massive quantities of mulberry leaves that are harvested from mulberry trees. The mulberry is the ideal diet for the larva. They produce the most transparent, most beautiful silk when they're fed mulberry leaves. The larvae will then begin their metamorphosis into the moths. So they'll spin this cocoon by extruding the liquid fibroin protein out of the two orifices in their head, and wrap this cocoon around themselves that they are attaching to a leaf or the twig or the branch of a tree. Which is where they've lived their life eating the leaves. And then all you have to do is gather, of course, you wouldn't have them in trees, you have them in trays full of leaves. And then you simply gather the cocoons and kill the moths before they can come out. Right? In nature, the moths would wake up, shake a little bit, begin to eat through the fibroin fibers, and emerge as a moth. In sericulture, which is what we call the industrial production of silk, seri, S-E-R-I, is like the little prefix that means silk. So saracen is like the silk coating material, like lanolin, like it ended in, that was the wool coating material. Saracen is the silk coating material. And so sericulture, we would pick out the largest, the fattest, the best looking cocoons. Only those cocoons would the moths be allowed to actually emerge from the cocoon, and then they would be encouraged to mate to produce the next generation of larvae. All the rest would be killed, dunked in boiling water, right? Sort of a silkworm soup, or gassed with like truck exhaust to carbon monoxide. You want to develop a method there that doesn't actually leave an unpleasant residue on the cocoons, right? But yeah, so insects were killed in the making of silk. And as I've mentioned previously, if you have a customer base, or if you yourself are the sort of person who feels that insects are capable of suffering, then that might bother you. In which case, you're going to want to obtain silk products that are made from wild silk, where the moths escaped, chewed their way through the cocoon. These products will not be shiny and lustrous and smooth, because they would be made from essentially broken silk fibers, staple-length silk fibers, because the moth does a lot of damage to the cocoon trying to get out. If you've ever held a silkworm cocoon, they're kind of like the size and shape and weight of a packing peanut. They're naturally empty, right? They wouldn't give them to school kids to examine if there was like a dead moth inside there. So they'll slice the top off and dump the moth out. But then, so it's very lightweight because the moth is gone. And it's actually kind of hard, right? You can't really, well, like a packing peanut. You can squeeze it, but it retains its cocoon-like shape. As I mentioned, reeling is what we call the unrolling of the silk fibers. Remember, there were two orifices, so there's actually two fibers that are held together by the saracen very tightly, right? So as we're unreeling a pair. So then we don't even have to spin that into yarn, right? If we leave a bit of the saracen on, right, we only remove enough to get it started to keep us being able to reel it, and then we unreel it, so we'll have like a wheel that will wrap it around as we're unreeling, and then we can actually weave with it just as it is, right? And so we'll likely weave something. I'm thinking of the ancient methods here. We'll weave something and then we'll dye it. And before we dye it, we'll wash it well with hot soapy water to remove any of the additional saracen. So we would have the benefit of being able to handle two silk fibers at the same time, the whole time we're manufacturing the fabric. And then at the very end, we wash off the additional saracen. This is a process called degumming, and then reveal the beautiful lustrous fiber underneath. Degumming is one of the most common finishes that are done with silk. The degumming is important because the saracen is a coating that prevents the silk fibers from absorbing moisture, so that makes it tough to dye. Also, it's kind of crusty, so if we want the lustrous fiber with the gorgeous trilobal cross section that reflects the most light possible, we need to get all that saracen off of there. Makes the fabric much softer now that we've taken off the crusty mucus layer, and it now weighs less and has less body, so it will drape more easily. So that's the benefit of degumming. Now, interestingly, some people kind of liked that weight and body, especially people back in centuries past. The Silk Road was a trading route that came from China through the Gobi Desert, through Afghanistan and Persia, which is now Iran, and down into Turkey, where it then made contact with the Western European civilizations that were willing to buy the silk. And at that point, it's worth its weight in gold, right? So you want to buy it, you just stack gold on one side of the scale, they stack silk on the other side, and then you trade. So how do we get back the weight that we would have had when it was still coated in saracen, but keep it as shiny as possible? This is the true alchemy right here. You want to turn lead into gold, soak silk in lead salts, and then sell it for more gold. The metallic salts, nickel salts, as I mentioned, lead salts, we would use a metal that wasn't super valuable. They actually, the metal ions will bond with the silk protein, and this improves the weight. I guess it increases the weight. The fibers then become stiffer because they're sort of coated in a metal carapace. They actually increase the production of a sound, right? So as the metallic weighted fibers rub against each other, they produce a kind of rustling sound. And this sound is called scroop. And scroop was so popular, especially among people of like the Victorian era, right? It indicated even from a distance that you were wearing silk, and it meant that even the slightest movements of your body, every tiny little tremor or shivering, the heaving of your chest as you struggled to breathe in your corset was accompanied by a soft little rustling sound. And so scroop was very desirable. It was basically considered kind of sexy, right? And so this was something that weighting would increase. Weighting is bad. It weakens the fibers. If you come across, for example, a crazy quilt, which were quilts that were made from scraps of silk, kind of like an early Facebook, right? So you would share scraps with your friends, and then each of you would make a quilt square and then share the squares, and then you could look at it and say, oh, remember when Tracy wore that dress and we had that party and Tim wore that tie, right? And so it was like a little snapshot album. You would embroider little designs on it that would tell a story. This was not about frugality. People who did this had tons of time, tons of money. It was about sharing the memories produced by the textiles. And so any weighted silks that are included in these now 100-year-old quilts have done something called shattering. The weight of the metal has broken the silk fibers. Very often it was just the warp or the filling that was weighted, and so the fibers in one direction break, leaving the other fibers in the other direction just hanging. So rather than a hole, you just have silk threads, and it looks kind of like a cat scratched it, right? It's very distressing. Because of this, actually, weighting of silk was one of the first things, areas of textiles that was regulated by law in the early 20th century. So legally, you can weight silk 10%, but after that, you're not allowed to weight it anymore because you don't want to damage the future of the material. You're allowed to weight 15% for black, and that's because, well, you know, if you're going to cry that much while you're wearing black silk, you want everybody to be able to hear the rustling of your furtive, sad widow's tears, right? That was Queen Victoria that really made that whole thing popular. Again, it's subject for a whole nother like history of textiles podcast. So degumming is very common. Weighting is kind of like the reverse degumming. There are some other specialty types of silk that we have to talk about, or you just won't know what they are. If we say silk, we typically mean cultivated fibers that are in the filament form and have been degummed. If we say raw silk, then we're still meaning cultivated. It came from a farm, so it's not wild silk, right? It's raw silk, but it's left in the gum, so it has a less lustrous surface, and in fact, it can be great. Interior designers do this quite a lot. They'll combine silk and raw silk in the same textile, potentially, right? So if you dye this with the same dyes, the raw silk is less shiny, right? And so then you have a matte luster contrast. Of course, all of the broken fibers from cocoons where the moth actually ate its way out, or just fibers that were broken and fell to the floor during reeling, are actually swept up and spun into yarns that are called noil. Now, technically, they could also be called waste silk, right? Because it's just leftover silk fibers, these staple length fibers. But noil is N-O-I-L. Noil is the word for the little bump that's created by the end of a spun silk, in the silk yarn, by the end of the silk fibers that are sticking out. So sort of like little bumps. They often will dye slightly darker color right at the end. And so you'll have this kind of bumpy surface. In wool, it's reminiscent of tweed, right? So noil it means a little tuft of fiber that's sticking out of the surface. So the noil fabrics are kind of bumpy and have a very interesting visual texture. Let's see, another specialty term, dupani, an Italian word, like duo, right? Dupani. Dupani silk is, this is so cool. So it turns out that if two silkworms spin their cocoons right next to each other in such a way that while they're still liquid, before they've hardened, the cocoons touch each other, the silk fibers actually kind of melt into each other, but the chemistry between the two worms is slightly different, right? And when we go to take these twin cocoons apart, what we'll do is very carefully shear the one cocoon away, leaving a patch on the other cocoon that's like double thick, right? And then the cocoon that was sheared away can be turned into noil, right? And then the cocoon that was double thick is very patiently unreeled, and every place where the other cocoon touched it is now double thick. So we can spin it or just use it as it is unreeled, weave it, and we end up with fabric that has these little short distances where it's double thick. And so it goes thick, thin, thick, thin, thick, thin as the fiber travels around the outside of the yarn. Now imagine, you'd have to get together hundreds of double cocoons in order to do this, or just push them close together right as they're cooling. And so DuPonty silks were prized by the most wealthy of people, which in this case would have been clerics of the Roman Catholic Church, right? Your bishops, your cardinals, your popes, used in vestments and churches, right? Because it had this really rare surface with the thick and thin yarns. When we learn about yarns, eventually we'll learn how we can imitate this during spinning, but this is a naturally occurring phenomenon. And then lastly, I mentioned that raw silk is cultivated silk that's not degummed, but that wild silk is silk that came from silkworms that weren't cultivated. Wild silk is also called tussa, T-U-S-S-A-A, tussa silk. And tussa silk is... because they're in the wild, we don't know if they're eating mulberry leaves. Like if they happen to be in an oak forest instead, they're going to eat oak leaves. The tannins in other varieties of leaves can create a tan or brown color in the silk fibers, and this is super cool. So if you're an interior designer and you have a discerning client, then they will love the fact that the color in this particular silk fiber is inherent to the fiber and was created by the diet of the silkworm. Very often this is staple length fibers, so yarns, because the wild means that the silkworm, the silk moth actually left the cocoon, so it's been chewed through and is now only staple length. You have to be careful because, of course, how are these cocoons gathered in the wild, right? Is it by little girls who should be in school, right? So you want to sort of make sure and go through the whole story of your sourcing there to ensure that there isn't anything that your clients could object to from a social responsibility perspective. But tussa silk, brown, irregular, occasionally filament, but very often staple length. I've already really talked quite a bit about the morphology of the silk fiber, but I just want to wrap that up for you just so that I'm sure you understand. It's a very transparent fiber. There's no scales, no cuticles. It's extruded. It's not built by enzymes, right? And so it doesn't have any kind of internal structure or organization. It's moderately oriented, and so it's strong. It's very lustrous because it has that trilobal shape. There's no crimp to it, very small diameter, right? It has really good drape. The hand is very smooth. It doesn't wrinkle very much, right? It wrinkles a bit more than similarly light animal fibers like alpaca, but it's still a good and resilient fiber. I mentioned that you could make yarns. You can make textiles out of silk from spider silk, from spider webs. Very strong material. Story is that you could pull a 747 with a rope the size of a pencil if it were made from spider silk. Silk from silkworms is very strong as well. We use it for things like parachutes, right? But the spider silk, the problem with the spiders is, they're cannibals. So it's really hard to set up like a whole spider. I just want to vomit when I'm even saying these words. It's hard to set up a spider farm because the spiders just kill each other like the vicious, horrible creatures that they are. I'm sorry to spider lovers out there. What is wrong with you? Spiders are horrible. We have tried to take the DNA that makes the spider protein and put it into, for example, a goat, so that the goat extrudes or expresses the protein in their milk, and then you isolate it and make the fibers. I don't know, it just sounds like a lot of work for something that maybe nature just wants us to leave alone. There's spiders! All right, well, that's the end of protein fibers. Ending on that absolutely horrible note. Oh, that Lord of the... Shelob. I hate spiders.